Have you ever noticed the more pages you build, the slower your website becomes? This is because of how Webflow handles interactions and classes. So if we create an interaction like homepage image hover, even if we only use it on the homepage, Webflow includes the code for that interaction on every page of our site. So the more interactions we create, the slower our site loads. The same goes for classes. We can create a class like blog grid, but the moment we add a style to it, Webflow includes these styles on every page of the site, even if that page doesn't have a blog grid on it. One possible alternative to Webflow interactions is CSS Animations. I have a tutorial on this I'll link in the description below. With CSS Animations, we can reuse an animation on multiple elements throughout our site. So on this paragraph, I have my slide up animation, and I've just overridden the delay. I could change the duration if I want, while still keeping the rest of the animation code intact. Usually with Webflow interactions, if one thing has to be different, we have to create a whole new animation. But CSS gives us much more flexibility. This works great for page load or hover interactions. For scroll interactions, we would need GSAP. I also have a full lesson on GSAP that I'll link in the description below. With GSAP, we can store the interaction code for any section inside of that section component, so that if the client moves this section to another page, the interaction code will go with it and we'll never have unused interaction code on any page. To optimize our website styles, we want to make use of reusable classes known as utilities. So if we have a blog grid that's 3 columns on desktop, switches to 2 on tablet, and 1 on the next breakpoint, instead of making this responsiveness only usable on the blog grid, we can rename this class to something more reusable, like grid 3. And then whether this is team members or news articles, anywhere we need a grid 3, we can add this class. It'll automatically be responsive to speed up our workflow, and it keeps our site code really clean. Now, there is a chance of someone accidentally editing this class and affecting multiple layouts throughout the site. So to fix that, we can have the best of both worlds by starting with a custom class. As long as we don't apply any styles to it, it won't show up in our website CSS file, and then we can just add our utility on top. So this comes with a ton of extra benefits, as well as just making overrides. So if we want to loosen up the gap here just for our blog grid and not the other 3 column grids, we have that flexibility here. And it only added 1 extra line of code to our site, since the rest of the responsiveness is coming from the grid 3. With a good utility system, it's possible to build entire sections and complex layouts without adding a single extra line of CSS to our site. Fluid font sizes and spacing values can also help. This is a Fluid Builder tool I created for use in Webflow, and we can have an H1 font size be maybe 4 rem here on desktop, and maybe it scales down to 2.5 rem on mobile. So this is just applying 1 fluid font size on desktop to our H1, and that will scale across all breakpoints, whereas traditionally we would have to apply a desktop, tablet, mobile size to the H1 tag and then repeat that to the H1 class. And when we multiply that across every font size on the site, all of our different padding values, that starts to really add up, and we're able to save a lot with fluid sizes. We can also reduce unneeded CSS through the way we handle layouts. Traditionally, we would reduce the column count on each breakpoint manually, but if the user increases their font size, text starts to overflow. In traditional development, when the user bumps up their font size, it automatically switches them to the next breakpoint. But that doesn't happen in Webflow because Webflow breakpoints are set with pixels. So we can solve that issue and still have lighter CSS by using an Autofit Grid. So this is just a regular grid with any gap we want. The only thing special about it is it has this grid template columns set to repeat autofit, and we can set any minimum size we want for our columns. So I'll say never let these columns get smaller than 19 rem. We can also go ahead and apply this to this parent grid that holds the content and grouping of cards together. So I'll start with a custom class like features grid, and then I'll add autofit on top. That way I can override the minimum width for this one grid while still keeping the rest of the grid styles intact. So what we'll notice here is at our max screen size, everything looks the way it should. Before these cards get smaller than 19 rem, they're going to automatically wrap. And before these two columns get smaller than 32 rem, the cards will wrap under the heading. And when they do, there's now more space for the cards, so they'll automatically start increasing the column count. And this is all happening on the desktop breakpoint without us tying anything to breakpoint. And as we go down, it just automatically wraps. That means right from the desktop breakpoint, if the user increases their font size, things are stacking and wrapping without us having to adjust anything manually. More clicking around in the style panel typically means more lines of code being added to our site. So the more we can just reuse things that already exist, it makes the process automatic and faster for us, but it also makes the site load faster in the end. In addition to optimizing CSS and JavaScript, we can also open the asset manager, select the assets like our images, and compress them to either of these file formats. And within site settings, there's some things we can do like making sure our CSS and HTML is minified under our publishing tab. We just want to make sure that this is turned on for every Webflow site that we create. But those are some of the core things you can do to really speed up your site speed in Webflow.